Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. In this case, it's world's finest quite literally, and it's also wasted our youths quite literally, or could be. Because not only are we talking about actual world's finest this time around, but it's just possible that my great great grandfather did waste his youth on these issues. The very comics that we're talking about today. They're in an attractive paperback. Uh, there was a big fat hardcover omnibus of these Silver Age World's Finest Adventures that I remember very fondly. I looked for it. I don't think I have it anymore. I think I sent it away to a young comic book enthusiast. I remember it fondly because it was an example, it was a product of that one brief shining moment where I had an active contact in the publicity department of DC Comics. Wow, this is just flopping over like that. All right, okay. Let's hold it like this, see if it makes any difference. For one brief moment, I had somebody on the staff of the publicity department at DC Comics. I don't know anybody there, and I don't know how to break into that black box anymore. But for a little while, a tiny little while, I had a publicist there saying, I looked at your channel. I think it's great. I also did a Google search, and I've seen how much you've written about comics in the last 10 years. Of course, we should be sending you anything you want, so just tell me anything that you want, and I'll send it to you. And that contact sent me that hardcover of Silver Age World's Finest because I was overjoyed to see it. But it's gone. But I have this paperback and the one that came after it. And as you can see from the cover, this is not contemporary at all. The whole attitude of the Silver Age and the Golden Age before it, but especially let's talk about the Silver Age, the greatest age of comic books, was that superheroes don't really have a personality. They are essentially personally interchangeable, and they all know and like each other. That is the standing assumption of these comics. Also, very much they are compartmentalized. Despite the fact that you're seeing Batman and Superman and Robin here, and despite the fact that in this volume, the three of those heroes have many adventures together, usually, for a long, long time, that was unheard of. Except in explicit team books, characters almost never made guest appearances in each other's books or in each other's stories. And that was true of World's Finest for a long time. This was a great comic book before the Silver Age issues that we're talking about today. It was a great comic book. You paid your money and you got a big anthology of stories. I want to show you what I'm talking about here. Let's see. Let's find a nice World War II era example. Shall we? Let's find a nice World War II era example. Yes, here we go. This is World's Finest number 13. It was when it was still being called the spring issue, before there was any kind of notion of regular notation. And here is the cover. And you can see Robin is holding the sign that says "Fight Paper Waste and Hang One on the Paper Hanger of Berlin." And this was a paper drive cover, a patriotic cover, a wartime cover. The paper hanger of Berlin is Adolf Hitler. And you would get that as a cover, but this is what you would get for the table of contents. You would get a Superman story, a Batman story, a Zaytara story, the father of Zatanna, a magician who can basically do anything. The Star-Spangled Kid and his sidekick Stripesy would be in here. Green Arrow had a steady feature in the old World's Finest, and in one of these old issues of World's Finest, let me get you another cover. As long as we're talking about it, let's get you another. Okay, there were wartime covers as well. Let's see if we can find one of those. Those are a lot of fun. Oh well, okay. Some of them are a lot of fun. Some of them aren't particularly a lot of fun. Some of them, of course, are a bit on the racist side. Because it was wartime, and this was wartime propaganda. So you will get, let's see here. Hang on, let me find a really good one that's not going to bother too many people. Here we go. Well, let me get you to the cover here. What you would get in these issues would be separate, self-contained adventures of these characters, plus prose adventures. You get a 2-page short story as well, just to break up. It was a full production that you would get in every issue. Like for instance, here you go, Small Time Dictator. See, which is just a prose story of 2 pages. In case that's what you felt like, you got almost everything except poetry in these things. You got in-house ads for whatever DC was doing, but this was the cover. That is Superman, Batman, and Robin laboring in their victory garden, which was again a wartime propaganda thing. This is the fall issue, and you would get where you were being asked as a patriotic citizen to plant a victory garden, not only to supply your own needs so that the produce of the country could go to supplying the troops, but also as a sign of patriotic defiance. These were a big, big deal. And you would get covers like this, really, really nice covers like this. I want to show you, some of them were, not all of them were patriotic, some of them were just plain innocent fun. Like this one, for instance, there's Superman ice skating. There's the bat catamaran or whatever, the batamaran or whatever you would call it, and he's outpacing it because, of course, he's Superman. And you would get covers like that had nothing to do with anything in the story because, crucially, these covers were the only times these characters were together. You weren't getting together inside the issue. There was an issue of World's Finest that had a Green Arrow backup story. They all had Green Arrow backup stories. And you, at one point in one Green Arrow backup story, he and his teen sidekick Speedy are driving down the street in their Arrowmobile when they come across Batman and Robin in the Batmobile. And they just sort of wave to each other and say, "Hey, good friends," like that. And believe it or not, 8-year-old fans wrote in to DC Comics and said, well, can't we have a whole adventure with them together? If they know each other, if they live in the same world, can't they have an adventure together? And eventually, that's what happened. Eventually, in Superman, Batman and Superman actually meet and have an adventure together. And that took off. Fans loved it. Absolutely loved it. And that, I think, is included in this volume. Yes, the very first thing that's in this volume is Superman. Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent have the same cabin on this ship, and when the lights go out, when there's an emergency, they both peel off their clothes and say, "What? What are the odds? You're actually Superman. Why, you're actually Batman." And then they have an adventure. But then it took off, and you have Superman and Batman and Robin having adventures together in a shared universe where you can. There is mention of the Batcave. Superman can go to the Batcave, and there's also mention of Gotham City and Metropolis, where Batman can go to Metropolis, and we start to get intertwinings in other ways as well. The writers had no choice. So it turns out that Perry White, the editor of the Daily Planet, where Clark Kent works as a reporter, once worked at the Gotham Gazette, a grand old newspaper in Gotham City. When he was a young cub reporter, he worked there. It turns out that Bruce Wayne knows Lex Luthor, at least a little, knows of him, but there aren't really supervillains in these stories. There are just bad guys. Okay? There are just bad guys. There aren't supervillains who are going to exhume the corpses of Bruce Wayne's dead parents, or who are going to kidnap the Catwoman, cut out her heart, put her on a heart ventilator, and tell Batman where to find the body, and also that he has 12 hours or they're going to, blow up the heart on national TV or something like that. There was never anything grotesque. There were never any supervillains like that. The closest that you got was Lex Luthor and the Joker. But otherwise, no. Otherwise, there would be some weird figure, a visitor from the future perhaps, or a mysterious masked figure who has superpowers, when, keep in mind, in this world, no one else does. Only Superman has superpowers. He says it over and over again. And also, at the same time that these comics were coming out, over in Superboy magazine, The Adventures of Superman when he was a teenage boy in the Midwest, he routinely says, well, I'm the only one on Earth who has superpowers. So if someone is showing superpowers, then they're either a robot of some kind, because, rather disturbingly, Superboy and then Superman in the Silver Age built a legion of identical robots that they dressed in their own costumes, and that they programmed to call them master. Uh, there were lots of these things too. They were always there, ready as a plot gimmick for an author to get out of Lois Lane trying to figure out whether or not Clark Kent is Superman. But what was that? Oh, right. That when that teenage Superboy would look at someone having superpowers, he would say, "Well, they're either from the future, or they're a robot, or they're an alien. All of the aliens in Julie Schwartz's world, or Mort Weisinger's world, all the aliens have superpowers." He would know one of those three things, because it certainly wouldn't be someone from Earth who had superpowers. It was just him. And that kind of carries over in these great Silver Age stories. We get almost nothing here. In this volume, I don't think at all. I don't think we get any hint at all of Batman's extensive rogues gallery. And likewise with Superman. We get barely any mention of that at all. I think the end of this volume has the Joker teaming up with Lex Luthor. But that was the first time, and that was very rare. That doesn't usually happen. Usually, what happens in these stories, again with the flopping, but I don't want to block the beam here. We'll just hold it like this. Usually what happens in these stories is that Batman will get superpowers or Superman will lose his superpowers. Usually that's the gist of these stories, of what's happening here. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was enjoyable. That was very, very enjoyable. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's go to, I think this thing has page numbers. Oh, no, it does have page numbers. Okay, so let's go to page 32. Shall we? Let's tootle on over to page 32. This is a story called Fort Crime. That's the cover, where it's an old-style medieval fort, only with guns. And Superman is leading the charge there because Batman and Robin are not bulletproof. And here is the splash page. Kurt Swan artwork. Batman and Robin hanging off the wall in easy crossfire of Tommy guns while Superman swoops in to save them. But that scene doesn't happen in the story. In the story, these criminals make their way, they escape from prison by surprise, while Lois Lane and Clark Kent are at the prison. So they take Lois Lane and Clark Kent captive as hostages. And Clark Kent is thinking, well, I don't want to reveal my secret identity. They're not killing us. So I'm not in extremis yet. What I need to do is sneak out a message on the Daily Planet teletype prompter there in Times Square, letting them know that the black sedan that's leaving town has hostages, that there are robbers in that black sedan, giving Batman and Robin a chance to intercept without Superman revealing his secret identity. And those criminals go to a fort just outside of Gotham City, which is a replica of a medieval fortress. So it has hidden staircases, hollow walls, all that sort of thing. And the bad guys, who are just gun-toting gangsters, they hole up there, and they put Superman to the test of how he can intervene without revealing his secret identity. And every single time he does, he manages to save Batman and Robin, who are otherwise getting themselves into a situation where they would simply be killed. And then at the end of the story, when all is well, they have saved everybody, and Clark and Batman and Robin have left Lois Lane's hands tied so that Clark can file an exclusive. He will let her loose once she can't compete with him. And then we have the final panel here, which is, but if you, this is Perry White asking Superman, but if you sent out the teletype message about the jailbreak by cutting into the outside line, why didn't you rescue Clark yourself, Superman? Which is a perfectly natural question. If you have the time to fiddle around with the outside wires of a teleprompt, then you have the time to swoop in, rip the roof off a car, and save the hostages. And melt the guns while you're at it with your heat vision. But instead, Superman says, I couldn't. Do you realize how busy I am? So he could muck around with the teletype, but he was just too busy to save Clark Kent and Lois Lane from being shot to death. And then Perry Wright responds by saying, nobody does, Superman. No, in other words, nobody realizes how busy you are. But it was lucky for Clark and Lois that Batman could rescue them when you couldn't. And that is That is a reference to the fact, it just ignores the fact that Batman and Robin would have died several times in their assault on Fort Crime if Superman hadn't intervened covertly as Clark Kent. And you might be thinking, well, okay, so that doesn't sound very satisfying. I mean, Batman and Robin are shown to be completely inept. And Superman actually is the one who saves the day. He just doesn't give anybody credit. And at the end, he's a bit of a jerk. He says that the reason that he didn't save Clark Kent, who, as far as everybody is concerned, is a friend of his, and Lois Lane, who's his girlfriend, that the reason he didn't save them, but only warned somebody else to save them, is because he's really busy. That's as the blue check marks on Twitter would say, that's not a good look. So you might be wondering, well, okay, that doesn't sound all that good. So why are you raving? I'll tell you why I'm raving. And in the process of telling you why I'm raving, I will give you a perfect way to understand how to read a Silver Age comic. It's that. That is how you read a Silver Age comic. That right there. What if the bad guys had a medieval fortress? That's it. You stop right there. That's it. What if the bad guys had a medieval fortress? What a wacky idea. And that's it. And you stop. You don't ask who built it. You don't ask what kind of drug money financed its construction. You don't ask who they are or what their Oedipal motives are. You don't ask any of that. Instead, you just think, what if the bad guys had a medieval fortress? What if it was called Fort Crime? Shall we give another example here? Here we go, The Contest of Heroes. Look at that cover. 2 signals up in the sky. There is no signal for Superman because he doesn't need one. Okay, he knows where crime is happening. They are rushing off. Are they going to answer each other's super signals? What a wacky idea. And that's it. And that's all. You don't ask about the electronics for, is it a spin-off of Stark Industries that made those signals, and maybe the signals collect dead bodies, or maybe the signal senders collect, somebody's got to collect dead bodies, because it's got to be gruesome and gritty. It has to be. Here, how about this one? Look at that. When Gotham challenged Metropolis, they both have their champions. Who's going to come out ahead? Looks like Superman might even be cheating there. Oh, look at that. We're keeping score. Superman versus Batman while all of Gotham and Metropolis look on. And that's it. That's a fantastic idea. Great. So you just make it work in however way that you like. Oh, I've got Frida yoga there going on. Oh, my goodness. Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, there you go. For instance, there's a story in this volume where Batman and Superman switch places. That's another staple plot of all of these stories, is that apparently Batman and Superman are interchangeable with each other. It over and over again happens that when they change costumes, no one can tell that they're not the originals. No one can, not even up close. Even Lois Lane, who's fairly familiar with what Superman looks like, completely fooled. Over and over again, completely fooled. That's not supposed to matter. I'm not supposed to care about that. And neither are you. Because superheroes don't exist. Okay? So the minute you go down the road, even one step down the Stan Lee road of saying, well, how would that work? Well, it wouldn't work. You are already on the wrong path the minute you take a step down that road. Because superheroes don't exist. And the minute you start wondering, well, what is the exact amount of tonnage that so-and-so can lift? And wouldn't that impact kill Batman just out of hand? I mean, or wouldn't that rip Robin's arm out of the socket? Hey, I know. Let's have a story where Robin's arm is ripped out of the socket, and let's make it really graphic. No. No. The minute you got one step down the road of asking whether or not that makes sense, you are on the wrong path, my children. There's another story in here, for instance, where Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne swap identities. They swap costumes. And Lois Lane is suspicious all throughout the story. She actually gets some really good lines in that story. What is that one called? She gets some really good lines in the story, and she is suspicious the whole time. That, I am fairly certain that Clark Kent is Superman. So if he is, you can't be. That sort of thing. And in the story, Bruce Wayne as Superman has to figure out how he can act like Superman, how that will work. How can he duplicate Superman's super feats without having Superman's powers? And some of the ways, well, now naturally I'm not finding it, but it doesn't matter because they're all so enjoyable. Some of the ways are a little bit ridiculous. Like, for instance, we're told in that story that Superman made a date with Lois Lane to help her move her furniture because she's moving house, and he can lift things. So he has an appointment to do that, and Lois Lane knows that he has an appointment to do that. And Bruce Wayne, if it's Batman in a Superman costume, he won't be able to do that easily. It will exhaust him, and then she'll know. And yet, when the moving day comes, Superman, it's actually Bruce Wayne in Superman's costume, is easily lifting this stuff and putting it into a moving van and then lifting the moving van and flying it off. And you, as a reader, are supposed to be A, 8 years old, and B, only interested in how fun that is. Wow. How on earth are you going to explain this? It is so much fun seeing this happen. I know that it's a hoodwink. I know it, but I can't figure out how you're doing this. In the story, it turns out that Batman and Robin visited Lois Lane's house the night before, took exhaustive photographs of all of her furniture, and had papier-mâché doubles of the furniture made, and then placed in her house after they'd had a moving crew in to move the real furniture. So that when the time came, Bruce Wayne, in Superman's costume, could walk into the house and pick up a couch with one hand, and it wouldn't be any trouble at all. And the moving van is actually the outer casing of a dirigible, with Robin at the controls. So that when Batman dressed as Superman, reaches underneath and seems to be picking it up, he's actually grabbing onto a metal bar underneath it as it takes off on its own, and he seems to be lifting it. And you're not supposed to think any of the Stan Lee thoughts that all of you are thinking right now. I can hear them. And you're not supposed to think them. Instead, you're supposed to think, well, isn't this fun? How would you simulate the superpowers of Superman if you didn't have them yourself? That's all you're supposed to think. That's all. Another example here, maybe one that strained perhaps my great-grandfather when he was a boy, more than some of the others. Some of them are a little bit easier to handle than others. There's one case here. Now, keep in mind, you're supposed to think about the cover. You're supposed to think, wow, how's that going to work? Here is the cover. The bat signal is flashing, but Batman has a broken leg. It's Superman and Robin who are chasing off after the bat signal. It's Superman and Robin, the new superhero team, not Batman and Robin. Poor Batman's left behind with a broken leg. You're supposed to see that and think, wow. And you do. Superman and Robin have a great deal of adventures, while Batman sits behind. Now, at the end, Batman manages to do a little bit of detective work, even with his leg in a cast. And that's just as well for Superman, because at the end of the story, Superman reveals to Batman that his leg was never actually broken. He had a toxin inside him that needed time to work its way out, and the more active he was, the more deadly it was. And so he and Robin had to trick Batman into thinking that he had a broken leg. And it's possible that my great-grandfather, when he was a little boy, read that, and maybe even, this was before the Stan Lee virus had taken control of comic books, so it did not exist yet. But it's possible even then that little boy said, well, okay, he's a good detective for figuring out the crime, but how smart could he be if he doesn't realize that his own leg isn't broken? That surely detection starts at home. That sort of thing. You weren't supposed to think that. And maybe that little boy did, but only that one time, I promise. Instead, what you get in this volume and the second volume, I don't know if there was ever a third one. I think the 2 volumes were only about half of that big omnibus that I wish I still had. I don't know why I got rid of it. But uh, the point of all of these stories is how much fun they are. And I haven't watched Michael K. Vaughan's video yet on this subject, but I feel certain that he will agree at least with that. He will at least agree that this is fun. He doesn't think that the Stan Lee virus is an evil blight on all of humanity the way I do. He doesn't think that. He grew up in the comic book world that was completely revamped, that had already been completely revamped by Stan Lee. So it had no place for anything like one and done stories, no place for anything like innocent happiness. Let's end on another fun cover, shall we? Oh, this was a great one. Look at that. The boy from outer space. That's Skyboy. Temporarily becomes the sidekick of Superman. See that? Look at that. He's got a kind of a variation of the Superman costume. And he features rather prominently in the A Legion of Superheroes fan fiction epic that I am constantly writing. But that's the point of all this, of the Silver Age. This is supposed to be fun. The writer comes up with some wacky gag, and then you try to figure out, well, how's that going to work? I could show you other examples from a little bit later than this particular run. Like, look at this. There's World's Finest. You've got Batman and Superman logos, and look what's happening. Batman, Superman, and Robin are punching their secret identities. What the? And that's all. That's all. You're supposed to think, well, how are you going to tell that story? What's going to explain that? Wow. What's going to explain that? That's all you're supposed to be thinking. Do I have another example of that? Yeah, well, we've got Wartime covers, but I don't know. Those don't play so well. I don't think that that something similar would happen in today's world if there were ever to be an actual land war, an actual World War III. I don't think that an actual land World War III will ever happen. I think World War II pretty much ended the prospects of that. But at the time, you had very much a kind of we're all in this together propaganda business. So you have Superman, Batman, and Robin throwing baseballs at the three villains of World War II. And nowhere in this villain lineup is Joseph Stalin, who had a greater body count than all of them put together, because he was an ally. So he's not on there. He's not. But again, even with after a cover like that, you get the table of contents, and it's not any of these people teaming up with each other. That came later. That came with these things. And that was terrific to see. Terrific for a number of reasons. The fun, yes, but also you honestly get the impression that it never crossed the writer's mind. One of the main writers here is Edmund Hamilton, the Captain Future guy that I can't seem to avoid. But you never get the impression that it was all that hard for writers week after week after week to come up with stories that were perfectly entertaining and fun and gave a meaningful thing for everybody to do. It's the thing you'll notice when you read these stories is that Robin has something to do in every issue. Let alone Batman. Robin does in every issue. He's not just a third wheel. Despite the huge difference in superpowers. Batman and Robin have no superpowers. Superman has all of them. He's a god in these issues. He's basically a god. Modern 21st century comic writers have sometimes been heard to whine on Twitter that makes storytelling impossible. That kind of gap makes storytelling impossible. It doesn't at all. That's just a tell on you. Granted, a lot of these stories involve Batman getting superpowers or Batman and Robin getting superpowers, but plenty of them don't. And they still manage to be tremendously, tremendously entertaining. It has been such a pleasure to go back both in paper and also digitally to World's Finest in preparation for this week. And Michael K. Vaughan mentioned, I think he mentioned in a video what we're doing next week, but it's completely slipped my mind. But I watched that video and I don't remember groaning at any of the choices. So I'm pretty sure that next week will be relatively palatable, but I don't remember what it was that we're doing next week. But if I know Michael K. Vaughan's comic book reading taste, he won't be able to stay long away from Marvel Comics. He might like his antique DCs, but he won't be able to stay long away from relevance, man, from verisimilitude, even though there's no verisimilitude because there are no superheroes. I bet it'll be a Marvel comic that we read next week. They're not all bad. I might rail against the Stan Lee virus, but I love a lot of the comics it produced. We shall see. I will try and find his video and prep myself ahead of time for what's coming. And I will see you all, well, all of you, the four of you who watch these comic book videos, I'll see you all then after a wonderful, wonderful trip to a better age, to an age when my great-grandfather as a boy could read these things. Let's get another cover to go out on, shall we? Oh, look at this one. What's Robin going to do? I mean, how's he going to call this one, right? Either he calls it against his friend Superman or he calls it against his friend Batman. What's he going to do? And somebody, a million years ago, collared in his cape. Shameful for this thing. This is World's Finest number 15. This is the fall issue. In mint condition, this thing would probably cost you $200. Somebody colored in Robin's cape. But anyway, that is our Epic Comic Book Wednesday for today. It was great fun to return to the Silver Age World's Finest. Just great fun. Next week could still be fun. We shall see. I'll see you all then. Thank you, Book.